Story 1. It's strange how some nights refuse to be forgotten. Years go by, you switch careers, friends drift away, you become a different person entirely, and yet, one specific evening will wait in the back of your mind like a splinter you never managed to remove. For me, that night is the Winter Carnival of 2013 in Maple Falls, Vermont. Every time snow gathers under the streetlights, that memory comes back. The cold deep in my bones, the smell of fried dough hanging in the air, and the way my heartbeat refused to slow down no matter how hard I tried to convince myself everything was fine. I was 17 then, living with my Aunt Karen. My parents' marriage had ended in a messy unraveling where both sides were certain they were right, and neither noticed their kid sitting in the middle of the wreckage. My mum moved 3 states away for a fresh start, and my dad stayed behind, but never seemed interested in checking if I was okay. Aunt Karen's house was small but warm, and she did her best to fill the space my parents had left. I kept my grades up, worked weekends at the library, and mostly kept to myself. The exception was Elliot James, tall, lanky, always carrying a camera around as if it were an extra limb. Elliot had been my closest friend since the 5th grade. He was sarcastic but never mean, and he noticed details the way frost collected on a mailbox, how people's eyes shifted when they lied that made you feel like you couldn't hide anything from him. We'd survived the awkward braces phase, failed attempts at learning guitar, and endless afternoons building snow forts in my backyard. That February, Elliot had talked non-stop about the Winter Carnival. He wanted night shots for his portfolio. Ferris wheel lights against the snow, fireworks over the ice rink. I wasn't in the mood for crowds or the cold, but saying no to him felt like saying no to the last piece of normalcy I had left. So on a Saturday night, bundled in 2 sweaters and my heaviest coat, I met him under the big wooden archway at the fairgrounds. Maple Falls might have been a small town, but the Winter Carnival was its claim to fame. People drove in from neighboring counties just to wander the rows of food stalls, try their luck at ring toss, and skate on the temporary ice rink the fire department set up every year. The air smelled like kettle corn and grilled sausage. Elliot was in his element, pausing every few steps to crouch for a better angle, the click of his shutter almost constant. I was halfway through my hot chocolate when I noticed him standing near the carousel, a man in a long brown coat and a dark beanie, late 20s, maybe early 30s. He wasn't smiling, wasn't eating, wasn't talking to anyone, just watching, and I had the unmistakable sense his eyes were fixed on us. I leaned toward Elliot. "You know that guy?" He followed my glance. "Nope. Why, he's just ... Never mind." I told myself I was imagining it. Big crowds made it easy to feel like you were being watched. Still, every time we moved to a different part of the fair, he was there by the game booths, near the fire pit, off to the side of the stage where the band was playing. When Elliot spotted a perfect vantage point for the fireworks near a row of old storage sheds, my stomach tightened. It was quieter out there, the music and laughter fading behind us. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Karen asking when I'd be home. I looked up from replying and froze. The man in the brown coat was standing in the shadows between us and the nearest light pole. "Elliot," I whispered, "we should go back. 1 sec, this shot's perfect." He was bent over his tripod, adjusting the lens, completely absorbed. The man took a slow step toward us, the snow crunching under his boots. Even from a distance, there was something deliberate about his movement, like every step had been planned in advance. I gripped Elliot's sleeve, but he shook me off without looking. "You two from around here?" the man asked. His voice was flat, but there was a trace of something rehearsed in it. Elliot hesitated. Yeah." The man's gaze shifted to me, locking on in a way that made my skin feel thin. "You should be careful. Walking back alone. Some people get lost out here." I didn't know what to say. A loud crack rang out from behind the sheds. Wood breaking or ice snapping. The man's head turned toward the sound. My eyes caught a glimpse of something in his coat pocket. Not the smooth shape of a phone. Something bulkier, heavier. "Elliot." Now my voice came out sharper than I meant. We hurried toward the main fairgrounds. I didn't look back, though I could feel the heat of his stare. Only when we reached the safety of the crowd did I realize my hands were trembling. Elliot stopped. Suddenly, his eyes on the camera screen. "Look at this." The last photo he'd taken was blurry, but the man was in it, standing in the dark, smiling. Not just smiling, but grinning in a way that made my stomach clench. And behind him, almost hidden by shadow, was another figure. Someone I hadn't noticed at all. I told him we needed to tell security. He said it was probably nothing. Maybe just someone playing a prank, he muttered. But he didn't delete the photo, and neither of us laughed. We left early. I stayed at his house that night. It was easier than walking home alone. His mom made popcorn and put on an old movie, but I barely registered it. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Through the window, the snow fell steadily, burying the carnival in white. That was the last time I went to the winter carnival. For weeks after, the photo stayed on Elliot's camera. We didn't talk about it much. Sometimes I'd catch him scrolling past it late at night, his thumb hovering over the delete button before moving on. I told myself it was nothing, a weird coincidence, that we'd been caught up in the tension of the moment. But deep down, I didn't believe that. About a month later, I was walking home from the library when I spotted a long brown coat across the street. My heart jumped before my brain could catch up. The man was halfway down the block, head bent, moving with that same unhurried pace. It might not have been him. I told myself coats like that weren't rare. But when he reached the corner, he stopped, turned his head, looked directly at me. Then he kept walking. I went straight to Aunt Karen's, locked the door, and didn't tell her. I didn't want her thinking I was making things up for attention. Elliot started acting different too. He was quieter, distracted. He'd skip our usual walks after school, saying he had editing to do. One afternoon, I dropped by his place unannounced. His camera was on the kitchen table, the screen lit up. The photo of the man in the brown coat was zoomed in so far the pixels blurred together, but you could still make out the grin. "You're still looking at it," I said. He jumped. "It's weird, right? I mean, look at the other guy in the background, doesn't it seem?" I leaned over. The shadowy figure was almost impossible to make out. Broad shoulders, maybe wearing a hood. I don't know. Could be anyone. "Yeah," Elliot said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. A few nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "You looked cold that night. Dress warmer next time." My chest went tight. I showed it to Elliot the next day, and his face drained of color. "Don't respond," he said. "Just don't." But by then, I knew whoever had been watching us that night at the carnival hadn't stopped. After that text, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I started checking behind me every time I walked home, taking longer routes just to see if anyone was keeping pace. Most nights the streets were empty, but sometimes I'd catch a flicker of movement in the reflection of a shop window or the crunch of footsteps in the snow that stopped when I stopped. I told myself it was just nerves. That's what fear does. It teaches you to doubt your own senses. One night in March, Elliot called and told me to meet him at the diner. He sounded urgent. When I got there, he was sitting in a booth with his camera bag open and a manila envelope in front of him. He didn't even say hello, just slid the envelope across the table. Inside were printed photos, grainy, taken at night from a distance. They were of us at the carnival, at the library, walking home. In one, I was standing at my aunt's mailbox, head down, flipping through letters. "These were in my locker this morning," he said. No note, no explanation. I stared at the photos. "You think it's him?" Elliot nodded slowly. "Look at the angle. They're taken from far away, but always the same height. It's like he's using the same lens every time." I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was, I'd known for weeks something wasn't right. Whoever this was, they weren't just lurking at public events anymore. They were in our neighborhoods. That night, I asked Aunt Karen if I could start staying later at the library to help with closing. She didn't question it, just reminded me to take the well-lit streets home. I didn't tell her about the photos or the text. Part of me thought saying it out loud would make it worse. But the silence didn't keep him away. The last time I saw the man in the brown coat was in early April, a week before the snow melted for good. Elliot had convinced me to walk out to the old railway bridge for some sunset shots. The place was deserted, just a stretch of rusted steel over the river and the faint hum of water below. We were halfway across when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the bridge, hands in his coat pockets, face shadowed by the sinking sun. That grin, I recognized it instantly. "Elliot," I said quietly. "I see him." His voice was tight. He raised his camera like he was about to take a picture, but the man took one slow step forward, then another. There was nowhere to go except back the way we came. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. The man didn't speed up, didn't shout, just kept closing the distance. With that deliberate walk, halfway back to solid ground, I heard Elliot's shutter click twice, then stop. I didn't look back until we hit the road. When I did, the man was gone. Just empty bridge behind us. We went straight to the police station. They took our statements, glanced at the photos, and said there wasn't much they could do without proof of a direct threat or trespassing. That night, Elliot called and said he'd finally deleted the carnival photo. "Maybe if we stop looking at it, he'll stop," he said. I wanted to believe him. Maybe if we stopped paying attention, it would all go away. A week later, he and his mum moved to Burlington. My aunt said it was for a job opportunity, but I never got the real reason from him. We still text sometimes, but we don't talk about the winter carnival. As for me, I still live in Maple Falls. I still walk past the fairgrounds in winter, and every so often, just at the edge of the snow-lit dark, I swear I see a tall figure in a brown coat, standing too still to be anyone in a hurry, watching, waiting. You can tell yourself it's nothing. You can try to explain it away. But when something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Fear might lie to you, but so can comfort. And sometimes the worst mistake is convincing yourself there's no danger at all. Story 2, asterisk. There are certain mornings that seem ordinary until you look back and realize they were anything but. Years later, you remember every detail. The smell of coffee in the air, the scrape of a chair against tile, the way someone's voice sounded when they said your name. I've carried one of those mornings with me since April 2016, when I was 20 and still figuring out what kind of person I wanted to be. That spring, I had just moved to Port Townsend, Washington. It wasn't a big move, just across the state, but it felt like an entirely different world. My cousin offered me a couch in his tiny apartment above a laundromat while I started my first semester at the local community college. The floor shook when the dryers downstairs kicked on. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, and the kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in, but it was cheap and it was temporary. Lena Carter had been my best friend since sophomore year of high school. She'd transferred to the same college a month earlier, fresh off a messy breakup with a guy who seemed to drain the light out of her. We fell back into our old rhythm quickly, spending most mornings together at the Velvet Bean, a cozy coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a bike repair shop. The place had big front windows that looked out over the street, a rotating display of local art on the walls, and a permanent soundtrack of soft indie music. Our corner booth was tucked away from the main flow of customers, just enough privacy to make it feel like our little hideout. On that particular morning, the sky was a uniform gray, and the fog made the fairy horn sound close enough to touch. Lena was doodling in the margins of her notebook, a habit she'd never broken, while I worked through a reading for Intro to Sociology. We'd already downed our first Americanos and were halfway through our second when the door opened. A couple walked in first, both in their mid-30s, dressed sharp like they'd come from some business meeting. With them was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a faded yellow sweater and clutching a small stuffed rabbit. She had straight brown hair and eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything in the room. Lena followed my gaze. "Cute bunny," she said, quietly. "Looks, I don't know, not happy. Weird place to bring a kid though," she added. I noticed the same thing. Not just the lack of a smile, but the faint bruises along her wrist, just visible when her sleeve slipped. The couple ordered drinks and took a table across from us. They spoke in low, quick whispers, leaning toward each other in what looked like an argument. The girl sat still, gripping her rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. The woman's phone rang, and both adults stepped outside to answer it, leaving the girl alone. I exchanged a look with Lena. Something about the way the girl kept glancing toward the door made my stomach knot. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lena asked. "Yeah," I said, already sliding out of the booth. I approached her slowly, crouching down so I wasn't towering over her. "That's a nice bunny. What's his name?" "Hey," I said gently. She hesitated, looking at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. "Oliver," she said finally, voice soft. "That's a good name," I said. Maya, is everything okay? She glanced toward the window where the couple stood with their backs to us. Can't talk to people. They said I shouldn't. The way she said it, not whiny, not defiant, just flat, made something twist in my chest. I noticed her nails were bitten down to the skin, some even raw. Do you want to help me pick out a cookie for Oliver? I asked, nodding toward the counter. She didn't smile, but she slid off her chair and followed me. Ty the barista was polishing mugs. We'd talked before about how he'd handled drunk customers, and even broken up a fight in the shop once. I gave him a look I hoped he understood. While the girl scanned the pastry case, Lena pulled out her phone under the table and started typing fast. I knew she was either looking up the anonymous police number or texting someone who could respond quickly. The door slammed open. The man strode in, his voice tight. Come here now. The girl froze. I stepped in front of her without thinking. She was just not your business. He snapped, stepping closer. His hand reached for her shoulder. Lena stood, voice dead in. Police are on their way. He stopped mid-step. His expression flickered. First anger, then something colder. He glanced at the woman outside, then back at us. You don't know what you're doing. Ty came around the counter, phone in hand. Sir, he said evenly, might want to leave before you do something you regret. The man's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and walked out, yanking the woman by the arm. The girl started crying quietly, her face buried in the rabbit's worn fur. Lena wrapped an arm around her and guided her back to our booth. I sat across from them, watching the window in case the couple came back. Ty called the police, his voice low but urgent. Possible missing child, I heard him say. Adults, male and female, left in a hurry, heading east on Water Street. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes. One knelt beside the girl and spoke to her gently, while the other asked us for descriptions and details. I told them about the bruises, the distant look in her eyes, how she said she wasn't allowed to talk to people. Lena added what she'd seen, her tone clipped and certain. When the officers walked the girl outside, one of them paused. Missing from Kitsap County for 2 weeks, he said. You did the right thing. She's been reported missing. The door shut behind them, and suddenly the coffee shop felt too quiet. Lena sat back, staring at her untouched drink. We almost didn't say anything, she whispered. Yeah, I said. My hands were still shaking. We stayed another hour just sitting there. Every time the bell over the door jingled, I found myself glancing up, half expecting the man to return. That night, lying on the pull-out couch in my cousin's apartment, I kept replaying it all in my head. The girl's eyes, the bruises, the man's voice. When he said we didn't know what we were doing, he was wrong. We knew exactly what we were doing. What scared me was how easily we could have done nothing. The next week, Lena and I went back to the Velvet Bean like normal. We sat in our corner booth, drank our coffee, and pretended everything was the same. But every so often, we'd catch each other glancing toward the door, listening for the sound of a slam or a voice cutting through the room. Ty told us the police had called him later that day to thank him. The girl had been reunited with her aunt, who had custody. The couple was being investigated for multiple charges that should have felt like closure. Instead, it left me wondering how many other kids like her we never see or choose not to. Months later, Lena and I were walking downtown when we saw a little girl in a yellow sweater across the street. For a moment, I thought it was her. My chest tightened. Then the girl laughed and ran toward, her mum holding an ice cream cone. Lena noticed my expression. You okay? Yeah, I said. But it wasn't true. That morning in the coffee shop had changed something in me. It made me realize that the line between being a bystander and making a difference is so thin it can vanish if you blink. We never saw the girl again. I hope she's somewhere safe, that she still has Oliver the rabbit, and that she meets more people who step in instead of looking away. Sometimes when I'm sitting in a coffee shop, I'll catch myself scanning the room without even meaning to. Not looking for trouble, exactly. Just making sure no one is sitting alone, too quiet with eyes that seem far away. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Stepping in might feel awkward, inconvenient, or risky, but silence can cost more than you think. You might be the only person willing to act, and for someone else, that can mean everything. Story 3. It's strange how a memory can feel like it belongs to a dream until you start pulling at the details. The warmth of the air that night, The way the light above the parking lot flickered just a little too slow. The sound of footsteps in a hallway where there shouldn't have been any. That trip in May 2019 was supposed to be nothing more than a much-needed escape. A long weekend away from our cramped apartment, the never-ending hum of college life in Flagstaff, and the kind of stress that makes you feel like your bones are tired. Sophie Hale had been my best friend for 6 years by then. We met in sophomore year of high school, two awkward kids who bonded over late-night diner coffee and a shared ability to find trouble in small towns. In college, we somehow managed to stay roommates without killing each other, though it meant tolerating the constant sound of her late-night documentaries and my bad habit of eating cereal at 3 a.m. She found the hotel in Santa Fe online, an old roadside place off Route 285, with bright turquoise doors and a neon cactus sign that buzzed faintly in the photos. "It's quirky," she told me, grinning over her laptop. "We'll be like Thelma and Louise without the crime spree." Our first day was exactly what we needed. We wandered through art galleries until our feet ached, bought more turquoise jewelry than either of us could justify, and sat in a hole-in-the-wall restaurant eating green chili enchiladas until the owners gently hinted it was closing time. The air was warm and carried the faint smell of mesquite smoke as we drove back to the hotel, laughing about nothing in particular. And then I saw him. He was standing under the far street light at the edge of the lot, hands buried in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if studying something in the dark. The flickering bulb made his outline shift like a badly cut frame in an old film reel. I wouldn't have thought much of it if not for the way his eyes seemed to lock on us as soon as we pulled in. "Do you know him?" I asked quietly. Sophie glanced his way without slowing down. "Nope, probably just another guest." We got to our room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains tight. Sophie flipped on the TV, her voice casual as she told me not to start imagining things. But something about the way his gaze had lingered stuck with me, like he wasn't just looking, but recognizing. It was close to midnight when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, even getting closer. Sophie muted the TV. We both sat there waiting. The sound stopped right outside our door. Then came the knock. Not a polite tap, a single heavy thud against the wood. I went to the peephole. The man from the parking lot stood perfectly still, eyes fixed forward. He didn't sway. He didn't shift. He just waited. We didn't answer. After a long moment, he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps faded, but it didn't feel like he'd gone far. The next morning, we went down for breakfast in the small lobby. I spotted him immediately sitting alone by the window, stirring his coffee in slow circles, but never lifting it to his mouth. Sophie avoided looking at him, but I couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed us as we walked past. Not a glance, a steady, unblinking track until we stepped outside. We tried to enjoy the day, wandering through museums and lingering over street food, but I found myself checking over my shoulder more than once. No one was there, but that didn't make me feel any better. When we came back that evening, the hallway to our room was empty. We just reached our door when I heard it. Footsteps behind us, fast and deliberate. Sophie fumbled with the keycard. I turned just enough to see him. He was closing the distance, his eyes locked on us like they'd been in the parking lot. We slipped inside, the door latching just as he reached it. Another single knock, then silence. The front desk clerk didn't seem particularly concerned when we called. "Ma'am," she said, her voice tinny through the phone. "Unless he tries to enter your room, there's not much we can do. He's probably just another guest." I looked at Sophie, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the remote still in her hand, her brows knit together. "What if he's not?" I asked. The clerk a pause. "Then we'll make a note in the system." We hung up, neither of us feeling better. Sophie tried to distract herself with some cooking show, but I found myself staring at the narrow gap between the bottom of the curtains and the carpet. The light outside shifted occasionally when someone passed by. Every time my heart jumped. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard the faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Not walking, just one sound, like someone shifting their weight. Then nothing. I told myself it was just the building settling, but I stayed awake until the sun edged over the blinds. The next day, we started avoiding the hallways whenever possible. If we heard voices in the corridor, we waited until they passed before leaving. We stopped taking the elevator and used the stairs closest to the lobby. It was exhausting, but the thought of running into him again in some quiet stretch of carpeted hallway was worse. By the third day, we were counting down the hours until checkout. We planned to leave early, but that evening we made the mistake of staying out just a little too long. When we returned, the parking lot was dim. 2 of the overhead lights had gone out. Sophie quickened her pace, the keycard already in her hand. I was right behind her when I heard the sound again. Footsteps. This time they weren't slow. They were coming fast, closing the space between us. We both turned. He was there, moving quickly, no expression on his face. We reached the door, shoved it opened and slammed it shut behind us. My hands shook as I slid the security latch in place. A knock came immediately, harder than before, then silence. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat up with the TV on low, half expecting another knock, but there was nothing, just the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing on the highway. By morning, we were ready to leave. We packed in silence, each of us moving like we'd been awake for days. When we carried our bags to the lobby, the clerk at the desk glanced up and said, "Checking out early." I wanted to tell her everything, the knocks, the footsteps, the way he just stood there, but the words felt heavy in my throat. Outside, the air was already warm. We loaded our bags into the car. Sophie shut the trunk, then froze. He was leaning against a silver sedan at the far end of the lot, arms crossed loosely. This time he was smiling, not a wide grin, just a small knowing curl of the lips. "Have a safe trip," he said. We didn't answer. We got in the car, locked the doors, and drove. It wasn't until we hit the highway that Sophie spoke. I don't think he was a guest. Neither did I. We drove the first 20 miles in silence, the desert flattening out around us, the morning sun turning everything gold. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that silver sedan trailing us, but the road behind was empty. It wasn't until we stopped for gas near Espanola that we spoke. Sophie leaned against the car, arms folded. "Do you think he knew what room we were in?" she asked. I thought about the knocks, always stopping at our door, never anyone else's. "Yeah," I said. "I think he knew." The rest of the drive to Flagstaff felt longer than the trip out had. Every roadside motel and quiet parking lot making me uneasy. It wasn't just fear of him following us. It was the realization that there are people who can insert themselves into your life so quietly without breaking any law you can prove and still manage to make you feel hunted. When we got home, I double-checked the locks before I even unpacked. That night, Sophie called her older brother, a police officer in Phoenix, and told him the whole story. He didn't laugh it off. "If it happens again," he said, "call the police right away and keep records, times, dates, everything." Weeks went by and nothing happened. No strange knocks, no unfamiliar cars parked outside our place. But every time I walked down a long hallway, in an office, a hotel, even the school library, I caught myself listening for footsteps behind me. Sophie and I never stayed in a budget motel again. We read reviews more carefully, checked parking lots before unloading our bags, and asked for rooms close to the lobby. It wasn't paranoia so much as realizing how thin the line is between harmless and dangerous, and how often you can't tell which side someone is on until it's too late. Sometimes I wonder who he was, if he really was just another guest. But I keep coming back to one thing: he never had luggage, not once. I still hear those footsteps sometimes, even in my dreams. Slow at first, then faster, closing the gap, and I always wake up before the knock. Some people you meet by chance, others seem to find you on purpose. The hard truth is, you may never know which kind you're dealing with until you're all ready to trust the feeling in your gut, even if you can't explain it. Safety doesn't always come from being right. Sometimes it comes from acting before you're sure. Story 4. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things turned strange. It wasn't like a movie where the music swells and you know something bad is coming. It was quieter than that. The summer of 2017 was my first taste of what I thought was real adulthood. I'd landed an entry-level job at a small publishing company in Richmond, Virginia. A building with creaky floors, fluorescent lights that hummed, and a coffee pot that tasted faintly of burnt toast, no matter who made it. I was 23, broke, and living in a one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop with my best friend, Holly Peterson. We'd met during freshman year of college, back when we thought running our own press would be romantic and rebellious. Instead, we ended up proofreading cookbooks about casseroles and answering emails about print delays. Still, it felt like progress. Our office was a strange ecosystem, 15 people total, each with their quirks. Mara, the receptionist who knew everyone's secrets, Phil from layout who wore the same corduroy jacket year-round, and our boss Ruth who had a voice like she was always telling you bad news. Holly's desk was in the back near the printers, and mine was up front by the window. We'd wave to each other across the room, usually while sneaking each other sarcastic post-it notes about the day's chaos. For the first month, it was boring in the most comforting way possible. We'd do coffee runs, split sandwiches from the deli next door, and occasionally suffer through awkward office birthday celebrations where everyone stood around singing too quietly. Then in early August, Daniel Price started. He was in his late 20s, tall but not imposing, with pale skin and a habit of never quite meeting your eyes, or when he did, holding your gaze a beat too long. He barely spoke beyond the bare minimum required for work. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people are just reserved. But there was one thing I noticed immediately: he never smiled. Not once. At lunch one day, I mentioned it to Holly. She shrugged, stabbing at her salad. He's probably just shy. She said it like it was the end of the discussion, but I couldn't shake the way he always seemed to be near her heart. The printer with no papers. In the break room at the same time she was walking in from lunch, right behind her. Too often to be coincidence. Mara noticed it too. One afternoon, as I was passing the front desk, she leaned in and whispered, "Your friend's got an admirer." Her tone made it sound less like gossip and more like a warning. It started small. Sticky notes left on Holly's desk when she was away. Never signed. Always vague. "You have a nice laugh. Some people don't appreciate you enough." We joked about it at first, assuming some awkward office flirt was testing the waters, but then came the clown figurines. The first one showed up on a Wednesday, a little porcelain clown with a cracked smile sitting on Holly's chair when she arrived. We laughed, called it creepy, and put it on her desk like it was a gag gift. 2 days later, another appeared, then another. By the time there were 4, she started keeping them in a drawer so she didn't have to see them staring at her all day. Around that time, I had my own encounter. I was working late, the office dark, except for my desk lamp. I heard the water cooler bubble and turned to see Daniel standing by Holly's desk. He wasn't touching anything, just staring at her empty chair like he was studying it. "Daniel," I said. He turned slowly, nodded once, and walked past me without a word. I told Holly the next day. She forced a laugh, but her eyes flickered with unease. From then on, we made sure neither of us was in the office alone with him. The turning point came on a Friday morning. I came in early to get a head start before a deadline. The office was quiet, except for the copier humming in the corner. As I walked past the break room, I saw him, Daniel, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. In front of him was a clown figurine, just like the others, but this one had a photo tucked under it. A candid shot of Holly taken from the side, her hair pulled back, wearing an old t-shirt. It wasn't from work. My stomach dropped when I realized. It was from our apartment balcony. My voice caught in my throat. "Where did you?" He smiled. For the first time since I'd met him, he smiled, and it wasn't kind. I backed out of the break room, went straight to Holly's desk, and told her to pack her bag. We walked out without telling anyone, my pulse pounding the whole way down the stairs. That weekend, we called the police. It turned out Daniel had a history, a restraining order from a former co-worker in another state. The details were enough to make my hands shake while I listened. The company fired him on Monday, but that wasn't the end. Within 2 weeks, Holly started getting envelopes with no return address. Inside each one was a single clown sticker. No note, no explanation, just the sticker, staring back at her from the kitchen table. We reported it, but nothing came of it. Without proof of who sent them, the police couldn't do much. We changed the locks on the apartment, kept the blinds closed, and avoided walking alone after dark. Holly stopped sitting on the balcony altogether. Months later, the letters stopped. Maybe he got bored. Maybe he moved on. But even now, years Later, I still catch myself scanning crowds for his face. Holly and I both carry that summer like a shadow, not always visible, but always there. We never figured out how he got the photos, whether he followed us home or watched from somewhere nearby. Sometimes I think about asking Holly if she still has the clown figurines, but I don't really want to know. It's strange how a person can enter your life so quietly and leave behind something you never shake. I think about that first smile he gave me, how it felt like the air in the room shifted. And I remember deciding in that moment that we had to leave right then without second guessing. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, trust them. Danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in small, unsettling patterns. It's better to act and be wrong than to hesitate and find out you were right too late.